today I have an awesome guest with me. Leah, how are you?
But I think nothing really prepares you for the real world when it comes to journalism for me. The concept for Black Girls Around the World was that I wanted to be able to speak to Black women.
You did some work with Netflix. Talk to us about that. Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Conversations You Keep. And today I have an awesome guest with me. She is a writer. She has a journalist. She has written for a numerous amount of publications, newspapers, magazines. Plus she has her own business. And not only that, but she is my sister. Welcome to the show, Leah. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thank you so much for joining me today. So if you could just introduce yourself and let everyone know who you are and what it is that you do.
Sure. So my name is Leah Sinclair. I am a freelance journalist and editor. I've done a bit of writing for various publications, including the Metro, the Guardian, Stylist, Vice, plenty others as well. I'm currently commissioning and editing for Metro UK on their platform and opinion section. And I have started my own platform, Black Girls Around the World, which aims to speak to different Black women in different parts of the world about their respective countries and cultures and how they navigate through life where they are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for that. That was an awesome introduction. So much going on, which is what we love, which is why you're here today. So how long have you actually been in the industry? How long have you been a journalist for?
Yeah, I'd say roughly about 5-6 years.
Would you say that you hand on heart knew what you wanted to do, or at the time it seemed like a good idea and you just ran with it?
Oh, I knew what I wanted to do. I was one of the fortunate ones to kind of have an idea of what I wanted to do early on. In school, I was really good at English and I loved magazines, and especially fashion magazines at the time. And it kind of worked out that I was just kind of like, okay, I'm going to do fashion journalism. I had a love for fashion, I had a love for magazines. I always enjoyed writing. I used to write, little stories when I was younger. So for me, it just kind of came together that way. And I would say from 16 years old, I knew I wanted to be a journalist. At that time, it was more in the direction of fashion, which, changed after I went to uni, but it was definitely always writing and journalism that I was in.
So now that it's changed and you're not doing fashion, what type of journalist are you?
Oh, well, I'm fortunate to write across various topics. Like I realized from studying fashion journalism at university that not only did I not really want to write about fashion, but I didn't want to be tied down to one specific topic. And I've been fortunate enough to write across various areas, writing a bit about like lifestyle, entertainment, I get to do a lot of the time, culture writing, and a lot in regards to kind of race and racism and diversity. So I write across various fields. I would say it mainly leans towards entertainment and culture at this stage.
What was your first publication that you had written for?
Well, I interned for 6 months for a small publication called DAZED Magazine. And at the time I was interning there and I wrote mainly about art, which is one of the other topics I write about quite a bit. And it was kind of art, lifestyle, culture, quarterly publication. So that was the first time I was published on kind of like in a professional setting. And then following that, I interned for Noctis, where I was published, and I wrote during like Fashion Week at that time. And then also the first kind of like bigger publication that I wrote for was DAZED, which is where I did my first internship. And I continued writing for them for about like a year in terms of like freelancing. That was like my first freelancing gig was with DAZED actually.
What would you say is missing that they don't prepare you for?
Well, I think one of the pieces of advice I would actually give to like budding journalists is definitely just go for a journalist course that is just journalism overall, opposed to a specific type. Like I did obviously fashion journalism, and for me, because I realized that I didn't want to write about fashion, it just meant that maybe some of the wider aspects of journalism that I could have learned at university, I didn't as a result. So for me, I would say that it was useful in the sense that it gave me kind of the basic skills that you would need in terms of journalism, as well as I would say the law aspects, because there's the legal aspects of things when it comes to journalism, which we had to learn about and do in terms of like media law and libel, copyright and things of that nature. So in terms of like the baseline of journalism and the logistics, I would say that going to uni and doing that course was useful. But I think nothing really prepares you for the real world when it comes to journalism for me. Getting the practical experience interning was extremely useful. And one of the things I would say about unis is that I feel like freelancing is an untapped area at universities. It may have changed now, but I feel like having a course or a segment in the course that's designated towards freelancing, how you pitch, who do you pitch to, would be really useful, especially in this climate where you're finding more people who are going to be freelancing anyway. You know, in terms of like freelancing anyway, there are a lot of journalists who tweet out when they're looking for pitches. They, you know, post on social media as well as on certain platforms to promote the fact that they're looking for people. So I think having a good list of websites, of people to follow on Twitter, of different editors and writers, I think is key. I think it's a case of mainly just doing your research. You know, if you want to write for, you know, if you do want to write for Vogue, for example, follow those editors, follow the commissioning editor. If you want to write for entertainment, follow their culture editor, see what the content is, read it, because a lot of people will pitch things to a publication and they don't actually consume the content. So I think, you know, it's key to kind of, even if you don't consume the content on a regular basis, to have a look on their site on a regular basis and have an idea of the type of content that they post and would be interested in. And generally, I think if you're coming fresh out of uni and you want to write for Vogue, it can happen. If you have an understanding of pitching and commissioning and stuff like that, you can put yourself forward, and if it's a good idea, they will commission it.
Is there a right way to do this?
I don't think there's a right or wrong way, but I think, you know, being employed at a national publication or a magazine or something of that nature, I think is always beneficial. You know, you can freelance and have the understanding of, you know, writing and prose and stuff like that. But I think being in the environment of working at, you know, a fast-paced newspaper or, you know, a publication, I think is always beneficial to have that experience. You know, being in office, you know, when you got to get a paper out, you know, every Thursday or every day is a totally different environment. And I think if you were to freelance first and then you wanted to step into a full-time position, it'd be quite an adjustment if you've never experienced it before. And I think if you're fresh out of uni, you may want the consistency of being in a full-time job and then from there deciding, you know, hey, I want to go freelance. So there is no right or wrong. You know, for me, I'm happy with the way I did it in terms of having a full-time job for 3 years as an editor with The Voice and then stepping out on my own freelancing.
What have been some of the challenges for you during this time as a freelance writer?
I think it's just, again, like kind of keeping that maintenance, you know, keeping up with the whole kind of like pitching and commissioning and stuff like that. You know, it's a tricky landscape anyway, but in the middle of a pandemic, it's a little bit more so. But I think because it's my first year freelancing, generally, I don't really have anything to compare it to. So for me, I started freelancing around December. And I've just kind of been in it and going with it. So I don't really have an experience of being like, well, last year freelancing was like this and now it's drastically different. So for me, it's I imagine for people who have been freelancing for years, they're seeing a massive difference. But because it's my first year, I've just kind of been going with it.
You mentioned that it's a new month. Who am I going to pitch to? Just to give us an idea, what is your trail of thought? What is your freelancer business mindset when it is like, you know, the first of the month?
You know, the first day of the month, I try and see what's happening, you know, that month in terms of, you know, are there any anniversaries of things that are happening that there may be think pieces or, you know, opinion pieces that people are going to want. You know, opinion pieces, just to touch on quickly, are always, I think, really good for freelancers because they are reactive, they are quick, and they are quick commissions. You know, you can see something in the news that day, come up with a pitch, and if they want it, they'll commission it, and you'll have to do it the next day, and then you're invoicing the following day, pretty much. So I think, you know, that's the kind of good thing with opinion pieces. If you're looking for something that isn't going to take you 2 weeks to write, opinion pieces are kind of like a good path to go down in terms of like a quick turnaround. So I do that pretty much every week. I kind of like see what the climate is on social media, what's happening in the news, and if there is like an interesting angle I can take from it, or an opinion that I have that I can pitch to some of the publications that I've written for in the past, or new publications as well. And so I generally just see what's happening in the world. That's really it.
So do you then have to kind of keep a catalogue of ideas so that you're not always trying to quickly do a pitch for someone and that you've got like a book of pitches ready? Is that what it kind of looks like?
Not really, because I feel like a lot of the time publications want things which are timely and not necessarily things that are gonna, a lot of the things that you find you'll get commissioned for are time sensitive. So it's not a case of I'm going to think of something now which is going to work for December. If you kind of develop ideas based around certain concepts, so for example, if I know it's Black History Month in October, I may develop what we call evergreen content. So it's content which is sometimes can roll over, so it can last over that specific period. So that's another way you can do. You can kind of think of evergreen content which lasts, kind of forever. Like there's no timeline to it. It'll always be relevant. So that's one way you can always keep kind of a book of evergreen ideas that you can pitch to a certain publication.
There was a time where tabloids just wanted a headline. They would find a story and, make that story into something that it probably really isn't. And I'm wondering whether today that is still the case, or whether we're just actually getting more real things that are going on. So do you feel that the media and the reporting and the tabloids, that what they are reporting is changing?
Clickbait content, exaggerative headlines, extremely hyperbolic, like that still sells papers for certain types of newspapers. So I think those things still exist, but I think what you'll find is that the media landscape is evolving, partially because of social media and online. You'll find more people from different backgrounds creating content which has a lot more meaning to it to some people. So you're seeing more of that, which means that the focus isn't so much on the tabloidy clickbaity publications, if you will. Like they still have their audiences, they still have their demographics, they still have their accomplishments and do what they do. But what you're finding now is that there's more publications coming out which are kind of challenging those narratives and creating maybe a bit more of a balance in terms of the type of content we see. There's a lot more content specific for people of color and Black people and people from LGBTQ backgrounds. There's just a lot more diversity, if you will, coming out. It's nowhere near the level where it needs to be, but I think the influx of that means that it has kind of changed the focus. So whereas in 2004 it maybe seemed a little bit more manic and clickbaity, that still exists, but it's not as talked about, I think.
Yes. With your journalism and being a writer, are there any elements that you felt that you were not so good at, that you just had to get good at?
I think initially at first, I found editing a bit of a challenge. And it's something that I've always, like, back to uni, like the concept of just constantly rereading my work initially was something that I couldn't stand it, but it's something you have to do. Like, it's an absolute necessity. But the idea of just constantly rereading the same words over again, I used to really struggle with, which is ironic now because obviously I have been an editor and now I'm commissioning and editing. So I've gotten past that. Thankfully, I find it a lot easier sometimes to edit other people's work than my own, but that's something I've had to work on and grow and learn little tricks, change my perspective on that. Like some things even as small as, I remember when I was working at The Voice, I would print out, if I was proofreading an article, I would print it out in big letters and go through it and read it and highlight and make edits and do it on the computer. And it's something that a colleague of mine told me to do instead of just like reading it on the screen. And sometimes stuff like that I found helped quite a bit.
So Black Lives Matter, very, very quickly, it happened this year. It happened during lockdown. How did you find the Black Lives Matter movement impacted your work?
Well, there were definitely a lot of commissions coming in, we'll say that, in terms of people wanting content in regards to Black Lives Matter and what I thought and stuff like that. So it was an opportunity to which I'm thankful for still, because it provided an opportunity to have an outlet. A lot of the time we are just kind of consuming this information and we're not doing anything with it. And I think for me, being able to consume that information and maybe kind of write it out in an opinion piece or a feature, or even with Black girls around the world, speaking to some of the women about Black Lives Matter and what they thought, was kind of cathartic in a way. So for me, I think it was being able to kind of be in the midst of Black Lives Matter and be able to kind of communicate what I was thinking and feeling with people who maybe felt similarly, was good. It was kind of a good thing out of a bad situation. We're nowhere near where we need to be. And ironically, I think those type of pieces aren't really in demand now as they were a couple months ago, which isn't surprising when you kind of work in this industry, like, how it goes. But I think there always needs to be an effort to kind of continue to tell those stories and to continue to promote what is happening and what's going on, which is what I kind of want to continue doing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And in that time, you did some work with Netflix. Talk to us about that.
Yes. Well, that was one of the, opportunities that came my way during that time. And Netflix wanted to put together a list of films and documentaries to watch to learn about systemic racism and the Black experience.
Justice for Joyce shines a light on the treatment that Black migrants often face in this country, deportation practices, and the struggle to get justice as a victim of police brutality.
Those are clothes from last night?
No, sir.
Get the clothes from last night.
And I think one of the things I really respected about that whole opportunity was the fact that Netflix actually said to me, you don't feel like you have to just put Netflix films here. Like, feel free to seek elsewhere, whether it's Hulu or Channel 4. Like, we just want to make sure that we can, include really useful content which is beneficial to our viewers. And I think, the fact that Netflix were like, you don't even have to keep it Netflix centric, I think says a lot about what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
And it was a really cool experience. It was super rapid. I did it in the midst of lockdown. So I was at home, wasn't in the studio. So I had to kind of, create a makeshift little sound booth to record the audio. And it was really cool. So I created a list of, documentaries and films and stuff like that I felt was educational and useful, and then I recorded the audio, and on their end they put the video together and everything, and it turned out great.
Tell our viewers about Black Girls Around the World. What is it, and how did the idea come about?
The concept for Black Girls Around the World was that I wanted to be able to speak to Black women in different parts of the world about their experiences navigating through life in their respective countries and cultures. I find that when it comes to Black women, our experiences aren't really amplified as much, and when they are, it's mainly focused, I will say, towards the African American experience or the Black British experience. And I wanted to create a platform which also spoke to Black women from all different parts of the world, and provides an opportunity for us to all hear each other's stories, because even though we are all Black women, we share a lot of similarities, but we also have a lot of differences based on where we grew up in our cultures. So I wanted to create a space which facilitates conversation and allows us to hear various stories, whether you're a Black woman living in the UAE or living in Australia or living in Birmingham or living in Ghana, just to be able to have a space where Black women can hear each other's stories and hear, the various amazing things that we're doing, across the board and across industries. And for me, I actually came up with the idea, I want to say 7 or 8 months prior to launching it. I came up with it. I think I was speaking to a friend. She was kind of saying to me, you need to start your own thing. And I was like, oh, I don't know what I would do. And she was like, well, what are you passionate about? And I said, I'm passionate about, sharing the stories of other Black girls like me, and also travel. At the time I was really interested in travel. I just came back from Barbados and I was going to Aruba and I was just on a travel kick, and it kind of came together based off of that, this idea of Black women and the different parts of the world, and the idea that maybe at some point I could go to these countries and interview them in person. It kind of came together from there. I came up with the name super easily. I think I said Black Girls Around the World, and that was the first name I came up with. The tagline, sharing stories of our sisters, came up with that really easily, and I came up with the logo really easily. It just all felt very very natural to me. And then as I went freelance, I kind of felt like, okay, I need to prioritize my time and focus on kind of building my freelancing. So I will kind of focus on Black girls around the world later in the year. That was kind of the idea. And then lockdown happened. And I found I had a bit of time, and I just said to myself, you know what, I'm gonna do it now. I'm gonna start it. And yeah, I think over the course of like 2 months, I think I started working on it in April, in terms of just kind of like gathering the interviews and contacting people. And I think in May, that's when I started to work on the website. And then in June 19th, I launched it. So it was kind of the course of 2.5, 3 months to kind of put it together. And since then, it's just been like a really cool experience, just continuing to build it and to reach out to different, Black girls around the world. And yeah, it's just been a really cool experience.
And it's great how you've just taken this idea from a conversation, and it just goes to show how important having conversations actually are. How did you mentally and physically transition the idea to the business it is today? What are some of the key steps that you took?
Well, the first step I took for me was kind of getting out, the Google Docs and just writing down what the idea is. I think being able to just say, my platform is this is what it's about, this is who it's for, I think is really key. So for me, I opened up Word and I kind of wrote down the name that I had at the time, which I came up with, which was Black Girls Around the World. I wrote down what the objective was and who I thought the audience was. And I think that was the starting point for it. And from there on, I kind of delved a bit deeper in terms of like thinking about what were the type of topics I wanted to cover within these interviews. And for me, it was kind of looking at, issues around identity, race, what it's like dating in these different countries, their upbringing and things of that nature. So I kind of came up with like a little blueprint, and with that kind of questions that I would ask based around that. I think one of the key things again is that, if you have an idea for something and you don't action it straight away, it doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Like for me, I knew that it was something that I really wanted to do, and it was all about timing. I came up with the idea, I would say about like maybe August, September of 2019, and launched it in June 2020. And I only picked it back up in around like March, April 2020.
You've spoken to many women across the globe. What has been one of your favourite stories or interviews so far, and why?
I'd say one of the ones that were my favorite was an interview with a woman named Jules Chambers, who's an American woman from New York who now lives in Iceland. And I think for me, that was one of my favorites because it was just a really insightful interview, kind of learning about her upbringing and her experience with racism and discrimination in New York, and how vastly different it is living in Iceland for her and her partner. And, just kind of getting an insight in terms of what it's like to live there. I remember speaking with her and she was talking about, the weather being such a major factor in terms of, your own kind of thought process. You have days in Iceland where it's just daylight pretty much 24/7, and then in the winters it's just completely dark, and you'd be surprised at how much that can impact your mood and your ability to do things. And just having those type of conversations, in a country that I've never been to, that I don't know if I could ever live in, was really, really interesting and insightful. So that was one of them, but I have many others, honestly.
So what's one of the challenges maybe one of these ladies have shared that made you put your own life or circumstances into perspective?
I'm not sure if it put my life into perspective, but I did interview a woman named Nicole, who is from Denmark. She's Danish. She identifies as Black, but she is half white and half Black. And she told me of an experience where she went to go and visit her dad, who is white, and she had braids in her hair, and he kind of said, why do you want to have your hair like that? And he ended up kind of cutting her hair, and her mum didn't know. And then when her mum saw, she kind of, naturally freaked out. And, wow. I can't relate to that. And I know that there are, many other mixed race people who have had to experience racism within their own family. And for me, it's something I can't even imagine, looking at my dad, who has his own issues with anti-Blackness to an extent, has, certain ideas that are directly reflected to who I am. And I think I can't imagine going through that, and I imagine that that's quite tricky to deal with, because you know that's your identity and someone you're really close to, even though, you know, she was very young at the time, but that's, you know, someone you look up to, and to have them react in that way.
Yeah, no, of course. One of the terms that we always hear is it's all about who you know. How has that played a part in your career journey so far?
You know, I think it's actually helped me out a lot more than I realized. I think I kind of went through a stage where I feel like, oh, I don't really have many contacts or this, that, and the third. And I actually have like a fair share, to be honest, of like great people that, you know, have even helped me get work. I can think of one specifically where I think I got an email about the artist and director Steve McQueen, who had an exhibition at the Tate, and I emailed them and was like, hey, is he available for an interview? And essentially the woman who I was in connection with, who I've liaised with in the past, kind of got me in contact with one of publications that they planned to have interview Steve, and they didn't have a writer at the time, so she kind of put in a good word for me and was like, hey, Leah can do this, she's interviewed him before. And, you know, I kind of got the job through that. And I've had other opportunities come my way where people have been like, oh, you know, do you want to interview this person? Or you know, you kind of have first run if you do interview them, and, you know, opportunities to attend amazing events and stuff like that. So I think, you know, I cultivated a lot of that over my time at The Voice and made some really great relationships and partnerships, and post that I've maintained a lot of them and made new ones.
So where in the world is the next stop for Black girls around the world? What country are you looking to find a lovely lady to interview for your platform?
Oh, well, we have quite a few in the works at the moment. One thing that I am really excited about, I mean, by the time that this comes out, I would have had, you know, our first high profile interview with Diane Abbott. Her story will be published in the final week of September, so that will be like the first high profile person that we've interviewed, which is really exciting. Thank you. You know, 3 months into the platform, it's really great that she kind of agreed to it, and it was an amazing experience to interview her and to hear her story, you know, in her own words. So yeah, the plan is just to kind of keep going. You know, I've reached out to, you know, quite a few other women in various parts of the world, which I'm excited to kind of, you know, move forward with, and as well as reaching out to other, you know, other women in different positions, and seeing, you know, what if they're interested in speaking with us and sharing their stories, because that's what we want to do. And yeah, so the aim is just to continue to build the audience, build the platform, you know, our social media, and just continuing to share the stories. You know, I've been getting a really great reception from people. I already felt like it was a good idea and a good project that I'm working on, but to hear the response from other people is definitely reassuring as well. So
Brilliant.
It's all exciting. Who knows?
So just briefly, how did that connection come about? How did you manage to interview Diane Abbott?
That's an example of not necessarily using a connection. You know, I sent an email. I found Diane's email, you know, her Parliament email on social or on her website, and I just kind of sent an email, kind of just gave it a go and was like, hey, why not? And I think that's a key tip, is just to kind of put yourself out there.
How can people find Black girls around the world? Where can they find all the information and read these stories?
Well, you can visit our site, which is blackgirlsaroundtheworld.com. And we are also on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook, at blackgirlsatw.
And when you're not writing, what else do you like to do to block out the noise and to, you know, stay jovial? What do you like to do?
I am a big podcast listener, so listening to podcasts I think is great, especially given the fact that most podcasts I listen to are you know, between 1.5 to 3 hours at a time. So sometimes you can just switch on a podcast and just be consumed by that for a good couple of hours, and that will be it. For me, listening to music as well is a big thing. Kind of going for walks and jogs as well, just getting away from screens, I find more useful now than ever before. I think especially since I've gone freelance, just kind of taking, you know, a few minutes or an hour just to kind of get out, you know, get away from, you know, looking at my laptop or looking at TV or looking at my phone, and just being out and getting fresh air.
And what song or album have you been listening to the most recently?
Oh, I've been listening to an artist called Victoria Monet, who has an album called Jaguar, which is so good. I've been playing it non-stop for the past month or so.
What would you say to your younger self, and what would you leave for your older self?
I would say to my younger self that it's gonna get better, that it's gonna look up, keep going, keep pushing. And for my older self, I would say, well done. You're doing well. You've done well. You worked hard, and continue to keep enjoying life. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep pushing. Keep going for what you believe is right, and standing strong in your ideas and your concepts, and continue to progress what you've created. That's what I'll say.
And then lastly, once again, just let everybody know how they can connect with you. If they want, to work with you, all the information they need to connect with Leah and of course your business.
Sure. So for me personally, I have a website, which is leahsinclair.co.uk, which has, the majority of all my online and print articles that I've done over the years, as well as contact information. I have Twitter. My Twitter and my Instagram is Leah Sinclair with 2 R's. It will be in the description box below, I imagine.
Yes, it will.
Great, good to know. And again, Black Girls Around the World, blackgirlsaroundtheworld.com, blackgirlsatw on Twitter and Instagram. And come and be a part of the community. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Leah. I'm so happy that I've been able to have you on the platform. Thank you so much for joining me today. So you've heard it here first on Conversations You Keep with Leah Sinclair, an established and flourishing journalist and business owner. So make sure you check out her website, check out her stories, and connect with her. Thank you once again, Leah. It has been amazing having you here.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, share, subscribe to our channel and press that notification bell.